1895. Family dinner photo found. Historian discovers a shocking and mysterious secret. Thomas Rivera had been working as a genealogical researcher for 12 years, helping families trace their ancestry through the tangled records of the American South. His Atlanta office was a modest space filled with filing cabinets, reference books, and 3 large monitors displaying genealogy databases. On a humid September morning in 2024, he received an email that would change everything. The message came from the estate executor of the late Mrs. Dorothy Henderson, who had passed away at 97. The executor was liquidating her possessions and had found boxes of old family photographs in her attic. There are some very old pictures here, and the family would like to know more about their history before we donate them to a museum. Thomas drove to the Henderson estate in suburban Atlanta that afternoon. The house was a sprawling ranch-style home built in the 1960s, its rooms now empty except for a few remaining boxes. The executor, a young lawyer named Jessica Chen, led him to the dining room where she'd laid out the photographs. Most of these are from the early 1900s, Jessica explained. Mrs. Henderson was meticulous about preserving family history, but she never labeled anything. Thomas examined the photographs carefully. There were dozens: formal portraits, wedding pictures, children playing in yards. Then one image stopped him cold. It was larger than the others, mounted on thick cardboard backing. The photograph showed a formal dinner scene from the 1890s. The image captured a white family gathered around an elaborate dining table. The setting was clearly wealthy: fine china, crystal glasses, an ornate chandelier visible overhead. 7 people sat at the table: a distinguished-looking man at the head, a woman at the opposite end, and 5 children arranged along the sides. Thomas pulled out his magnifying glass. The quality was exceptional, every detail sharp. He counted carefully. 7 people. "Do you have any family records?" he asked Jessica. "Census data? Birth certificates?" Jessica retrieved a folder. Mrs. Henderson kept everything. Here's a family tree and census records. Thomas compared the photograph to the documents. According to the 1900 census, the Henderson family in 1895 consisted of Richard Henderson, his wife Margaret, and 4 children: Robert, Elizabeth, William, and Catherine. 6 people total. But the photograph showed 7. His pulse quickened. One more child than official records indicated. "Jessica," he said slowly, "I think we have a mystery here." Thomas returned to his office with high-resolution scans and all available Henderson family documents. He worked late into the night, examining every detail on his large monitor. The photograph's back bore faded ink: Christmas dinner, 1895, and a photographer's stamp reading Whitmore Studio, Atlanta, Georgia. The family arrangement was traditional. Richard Henderson sat at the table's head, posture rigid in a dark suit, his graying beard neatly trimmed. Margaret Henderson sat opposite, wearing an elegant dark dress with lace collar. Her expression was composed but guarded. The children were arranged by age. Robert, 16, sat beside his father. Next came Elizabeth, 14, with perfect posture. On Margaret's side sat William, 11, and beside him, Catherine, 8 years old. And then the 7th person. She sat between Catherine and Margaret, a girl appearing 8 or 9 years old. She wore a dress similar to the other girls, dark hair pulled back neatly. But her positioning was different. She sat slightly back from the table, present but not quite part of the arrangement. Thomas zoomed in on her face. Her expression was solemn and watchful. There was something careful about how she'd been positioned, as if the photographer had deliberately placed her in a way that was visible, yet somehow separate. He turned to census records again. The 1890 census had been largely destroyed by fire, but the 1900 census was clear. Only 4 Henderson children. He searched birth records, death records, newspaper announcements. Nothing indicated another child. Around midnight, Thomas called Dr. Patricia Foster, a historian at Emory University who specialized in Southern family structures and hidden histories. Despite the late hour, she answered quickly. "Patricia, I need your expertise. I've found a photograph that doesn't match the documentary record." He emailed her the scanned image and census data. He heard her typing, then a long pause. "Thomas, this is extraordinary," she said. "A child present in a formal family photograph but absent from all official records. In the 1890s, there were several reasons this might happen, and none of them are pleasant." "What are you thinking?" "Hidden children. Families who took in orphans informally, children whose parents had died violently or tragically, especially children of lynching victims. These families couldn't officially adopt them. It was too dangerous. But they raised them anyway." Thomas felt a chill. So, this girl might have been a rescued child, hidden in plain sight, given a home but never given official recognition for her own protection. The next morning, Thomas began researching the Henderson family's background more thoroughly. He needed to understand who they were, what they believed, what might have motivated them to take such a risk. Census records showed Richard Henderson was a textile merchant who'd made considerable wealth in the 1880s and 1890s. Property records indicated the family owned a large home in Atlanta's Inman Park neighborhood, then a prosperous area. But it was newspaper archives that provided the first real clue. Thomas found an article from the Atlanta Constitution dated March 1891, "Local Merchant Speaks Against Violence." The brief piece described Richard Henderson addressing a Chamber of Commerce meeting, arguing that lawlessness and mob rule were bad for business and Georgia's reputation. The article was dismissive in tone, suggesting Henderson's views were unpopular. Thomas found more articles. In 1892, Henderson had written a letter to the editor condemning a lynching in nearby Decatur. In 1893, he donated money to a legal defense fund for a black man falsely accused of theft. Each time, the newspaper's response was hostile, calling him a Negro sympathizer, and worse. Patricia arrived at his office around noon, carrying her own research materials. She'd been investigating parallel cases, white families in the South who'd secretly harbored children of color during this period. "It was more common than people realize," she explained, spreading documents across his desk. After Reconstruction failed and violence against black communities escalated, some white families, usually those with abolitionist backgrounds or strong religious convictions, would take in orphaned children. But they couldn't do it officially. Adoption laws were restrictive, and in many places it was effectively illegal for white families to raise black children. So they hid them? In plain sight, yes. They'd claim the child was a servant's daughter, or a distant relative, or simply not acknowledge them in official records. The children lived with the families, were educated privately, but had no legal existence. Thomas showed her the enhanced photographs he'd created, zooming in on each person's face. The mysterious seventh child had delicate features, dark eyes, and an expression that seemed older than her years. "Look at how Margaret is positioned," Patricia pointed out. "Her hand is near the girl's shoulder, not touching but protective, and Richard is looking at her, not at the camera. This wasn't just a casual inclusion. They wanted her in this photograph. But why photograph her at all if they were hiding her?" Patricia smiled sadly. "Because they loved her. Because she was family, even if the law didn't recognize it. This photograph is evidence of that love, and of their defiance." Thomas decided to investigate the photographer next. Whitmore Studio had operated in Atlanta from 1887 to 1902, according to city directories. He found the studio's location, a building on Peachtree Street that no longer existed, demolished in the 1950s for a parking garage. But the Atlanta History Center had archived some of Whitmore Studio's business records, donated by the photographer's grandson in 1976. Thomas requested access and spent an afternoon in the climate-controlled archives, carefully examining ledgers and correspondence. The ledgers were meticulous. Each photograph session was recorded with the client's name, date, type of sitting, and payment received. Thomas found the entry for December 20th, 1895. Henderson family, dinner scene, special arrangement, $15. $15 was an enormous sum for a photograph in 1895, roughly equivalent to $500 today. The notation, special arrangement, intrigued him. What made this sitting special? He found his answer in a letter tucked into the ledger, dated December 18th, 1895. It was from Richard Henderson to James Whitmore, the photographer. "Dear Mr. Whitmore, I wish to commission a family photograph for Christmas, to be taken at our home during our holiday dinner. I understand you are a man of discretion and modern sensibilities. Our family includes a child who is not reflected in public records, for reasons I trust you will understand and respect. We wish her to be included in this portrait as the beloved member of our family that she is. I will pay whatever premium is necessary to ensure your complete discretion. Sincerely, Richard Henderson." Thomas sat back, his heart pounding. This was it, direct evidence that the Hendersons had deliberately included the hidden child in their family photograph, and that they'd sought out a photographer who would be sympathetic to their situation. He photographed the letter and continued searching. He found 2 more references to special arrangement sittings in Whitmore's ledgers, both involving families that Thomas would later discover had similar histories of quietly harboring orphaned children. James Whitmore, it seemed, had been more than just a photographer. He'd been an ally, someone who used his profession to help document and preserve families that society wanted to erase. Patricia was excited when Thomas shared his findings. "This is remarkable. You're uncovering an entire underground network. families who rescued children, photographers who documented them, all operating beneath the official historical record. "But we still don't know who the girl was," Thomas said. "What was her name? What happened to her?" "That," Patricia replied, "will be the hardest part to discover." Thomas knew that if his theory was correct, if the seventh child was the orphaned daughter of lynching victims, then somewhere there would be a record of violence against a black family in Georgia around 1887 to 1894, roughly the period when the girl would have been born or orphaned. The research was grim. He spent days working through newspaper archives, NAACP records, and historical databases documenting racial violence. The sheer number of cases was overwhelming and heartbreaking. Between 1885 and 1895, there were dozens of lynchings in Georgia alone, many involving entire families. One case stopped him. In April 1888, a black couple named Samuel and Grace Thompson had been murdered by a mob in a small town called Hapeville, just south of Atlanta. The newspaper account was brutal and casual in its racism, describing the couple as having been dealt with for the alleged crime of Samuel defending his property against a white neighbor who'd tried to steal his horse. What caught Thomas's attention was a single line near the end of the article. The couple's young daughter was not found at the scene. Thomas searched for follow-up articles. There were none. The daughter was never mentioned again. Not in news reports, not in court records, not in any official documentation. She had simply vanished from the historical record. He calculated dates. If the Thompsons' daughter had been about 1 or 2 years old in April 1888, she would have been approximately 8 or 9 in the 1895 photograph. The timeline matched. He called Patricia immediately. "I think I found her. A couple named Thompson, murdered in 1888. They had a daughter who disappeared." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Hapeville. That's very close to Atlanta. Close enough that someone like Richard Henderson might have heard about it, might have been able to intervene. But how would we prove it? We need to find more photographs of the Henderson family. If this girl appears in multiple images, we can track her aging, see if she stayed with the family. We need to search for any documentation, letters, diaries, anything that might mention her by name." Thomas returned to Jessica Chen. "I need to see everything. Every photograph, every document, every scrap of paper from the Henderson estate." Jessica looked at him curiously. "You've found something, haven't you?" "I think so, but I need more evidence." She led him back to the house, to the attic where 3 more boxes remained unopened. Mrs. Henderson kept all of this sealed. She said it was for future generations to understand. I didn't know what she meant. Now Thomas thought he did. Inside the boxes, Thomas found treasure. Dozens more photographs, letters bundled with ribbon, a leather journal, and a small wooden box containing personal items. He worked carefully, documenting everything before examining it. The photographs told a story. There was an image from 1896 showing the Henderson family on their front porch. 7 people again, including the mysterious girl. Another from 1898 showed the children, now older, posed in the garden. The girl was there, perhaps 11 or 12 now, standing slightly apart but unmistakably present. Then he found a photograph from 1902. The older children had grown. Robert was now a young man, Elizabeth a young woman. And there, standing with Catherine, was the girl, now a teenager of about 15. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written names: Robert, Elizabeth, William, Catherine, Sarah. Sarah. Thomas felt tears prick his eyes. After days of searching, he finally had a name: Sarah. The hidden child had a name. The journal belonged to Margaret Henderson, begun in 1887 and continuing sporadically through 1904. Thomas opened it carefully, the leather binding cracking slightly. Margaret's handwriting was precise and elegant. He found the entry he was looking for, dated May 3, 1888. "Today we welcomed a child into our home under circumstances I can never fully record here. Her name is Sarah. She is not yet 2 years old. She has lost everything. We have vowed to give her a home, a family, and safety, even though we cannot give her official recognition. The world will not understand. The law will not permit it. But God has placed her in our care, and we will not fail her." Later entries mentioned Sarah occasionally. Margaret wrote about teaching her to read, about her quick intelligence, about her nightmares that slowly faded. In 1890, "Sarah asked me today if I am her mother. I told her the truth, that I am not the mother who bore her, but I am the mother who will raise her, protect her, and love her as my own." Patricia arrived at the estate that evening. Thomas showed her everything: the photographs tracking Sarah's growth, Margaret's journal entries, the name finally revealed. "This is extraordinary documentation," Patricia said. Most hidden children left almost no trace, but the Hendersons deliberately preserved Sarah's presence. They wanted future generations to know she existed. But why hide her at all? Thomas asked. Why not adopt her officially? Because it was illegal in Georgia. Interracial adoption wasn't legally possible, and even informal guardianship of a black child by a white family would have brought violence. The Hendersons would have been ostracized, possibly attacked. Sarah herself would have been in constant danger. So they hid her in plain sight. Exactly. To the outside world, she was probably presented as a servant's child, or simply not explained at all. But within the family, she was Sarah. She was their daughter. Thomas became obsessed with finding out what happened to Sarah after the photographs ended. The last image showing her was from 1905, when she would have been about 19. After that, she vanished from the Henderson family photographs. He searched census records, marriage records, death certificates. In 1910, the Henderson family census listed only the biological children. No mention of Sarah. Had she left? Married? Died? Then Patricia made a breakthrough. She'd been searching through records at the Atlanta University Center, a consortium of historically black colleges. In the archives of Spelman College, she found a registry of students from 1903 to 1907. Listed for the 1903-1904 academic year, Sarah Thompson, age 17. Sponsor, Henderson family. Thompson. Thomas breathed. They gave her back her original family name. The registry showed Sarah had studied teaching and graduated in 1907. After that, the trail seemed to go cold again. But Patricia kept digging, this time through teacher employment records for Georgia's segregated school systems. She found Sarah Thompson listed as a teacher at a small rural school for black children in Macon, Georgia, from 1907 to 1910. Then the trail shifted to Birmingham, Alabama, where a Sarah Thompson taught from 1911 to 1945. She became an educator, Patricia said, just like Margaret Henderson taught her. She spent her life teaching children who looked like her, children who'd been denied opportunities, just as she had been. Thomas found a photograph from 1920 in a Birmingham newspaper archive. It showed teachers at the Carver Street School. Among them stood a woman identified as Miss Sarah Thompson. He compared it to the teenage girl in the 1902 Henderson photograph. It was her. Older, more serious, but unmistakably the same person. Further research revealed more. Sarah had never married, had devoted her life to education. She'd been active in the NAACP, had participated in voter registration efforts in the 1940s. She died in 1963, just months before the March on Washington, at the age of 77. Her obituary in the Birmingham News was brief. Sarah Thompson, retired teacher, died peacefully. She taught generations of Birmingham children and was known for her dedication and high standards. She is survived by several nieces and nephews. Those nieces and nephews, Thomas discovered, were the children of Catherine Henderson, the youngest biological Henderson daughter. Sarah had maintained contact with the family throughout her life, had been considered an aunt by the next generation, even if the connection couldn't be publicly acknowledged. She lived two lives, Thomas said to Patricia, as Sarah Thompson, black teacher and activist, and as Sarah, the Hendersons' hidden daughter. Both were real. Both were her. And now, Patricia replied, we can tell both stories. Thomas and Patricia spent weeks preparing their findings. They documented everything: the photographs, Margaret's journal, the lynching records, Sarah's educational career, her later activism. They contacted academic journals, local newspapers, and historical societies. The story broke in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on a Sunday in November 2024. Hidden Daughter: How One Family Saved a Child and Defied Georgia's Racial Laws. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The article was shared thousands of times within hours. National news outlets picked it up. Historians who'd spent careers studying this period expressed shock. Here was documented evidence of interracial family formation in an era when such things were considered impossible. Thomas's phone rang constantly with interview requests. NPR, CNN, local television stations. The Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture called, asking about the photographs and documents. The National Archives wanted to include the story in their collections on Reconstruction and its aftermath. Academic responses were equally strong. Historians began searching their own archives for similar cases. A professor in Mississippi found evidence of another white family who'd hidden black orphans. A researcher in South Carolina discovered letters describing protected children who lived with families but weren't officially recorded. Most moving were the responses from descendants. People came forward with family stories they'd never understood. Tales of mysterious aunts or cousins who didn't quite fit the family tree, of children raised in white households during the Jim Crow era, of photographs showing people whose presence was never explained. One woman wrote to Thomas, "My grandmother always told us about a white family who'd saved her mother after her grandparents were killed in a riot in 1898. We thought it was just a family legend. Now I realize it might have been true." Jessica Chen, the estate executor, was overwhelmed. "Mrs. Henderson always said this history was important. She made me promise to find someone who would understand it, who would tell it properly. I think she knew what these photographs contained." The Henderson family's living descendants, great-great-grandchildren of Robert, Elizabeth, William, and Catherine, came forward. They'd grown up hearing vague stories about Aunt Sarah, but had never known the full truth. One descendant, Michael Patterson, Catherine's great-grandson, reached out to Thomas. "We have some of Sarah's letters. She wrote to my great-grandmother regularly. I never understood their relationship, why this black woman was writing such affectionate letters to my white ancestor. Now it makes sense. They were sisters." Thomas arranged a gathering in Atlanta for December 2024, descendants of the Henderson family and descendants of Sarah Thompson meeting for the first time. He'd managed to locate Sarah's family through Birmingham church records and genealogical research. Her great-niece, Dr. Angela Williams, a retired professor, agreed to attend. The meeting took place at the Atlanta History Center, where the original 1895 photograph was now on display. 15 people gathered, Henderson descendants and Thompson descendants, separated by blood but connected by Sarah's story. Michael Patterson and Dr. Williams stood before the photograph together, studying the dinner scene, the 7 people frozen in time. "That's Sarah," Dr. Williams said softly, pointing to the girl between Catherine and Margaret. "My great-aunt. We have one photograph of her as an elderly woman, but I never imagined we'd see her as a child." "And that's Catherine," Michael added, pointing to the 8-year-old blonde girl. "My great-grandmother. They grew up together. They were sisters." The two families spent hours sharing stories, photographs, letters. The Henderson descendants brought Margaret's journal. Sarah's descendants brought letters Sarah had written to Catherine in the 1920s and 1930s, maintaining their connection across the color line even as segregation hardened. One letter from 1925 stood out. Sarah wrote to Catherine, "I think of those childhood days often. You shared your mother with me when I had lost mine. You shared your home, your family, your life. The world said we couldn't be sisters, but we knew better. We knew the truth. Thank you for that gift." Dr. Williams wiped tears from her eyes. Sarah never spoke much about her childhood. "I think it was too painful. Losing her parents, living in a world that denied her existence. But she kept these connections. The Hendersons gave her more than shelter. They gave her love." The families decided to work together on a larger project, documenting the full story and donating all materials to a joint archive that would preserve both families' histories. They wanted Sarah's story told completely, not as a footnote, but as the central narrative it deserved to be. Patricia proposed organizing a symposium on hidden families and racial justice in the post-Reconstruction South. Universities expressed interest. Filmmakers reached out about a documentary. But perhaps most importantly, the two families, Henderson and Thompson, had found each other. They planned reunions, shared genealogical research, and began building relationships across the racial divides that had separated them for generations. As Thomas watched them interact, he felt proud of what his discovery had sparked. One photograph had revealed a hidden world of courage, love, and resistance. 6 months after the story broke, Thomas stood in the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. The museum had created a special exhibition, Hidden Families, Children Saved, Stories Recovered. The 1895 Henderson family photograph was the centerpiece, dramatically enlarged and beautifully lit. The exhibition explored the broader phenomenon Thomas and Patricia had uncovered. Dozens of white families across the South who had secretly harbored black orphans during the Jim Crow era, risking social ostracism and violence to save children whose parents had been murdered by racial violence. Interactive displays explained the historical context, the wave of lynchings that swept the South after Reconstruction failed, the children left behind, the few courageous families who intervened. Personal artifacts brought the stories to life. Photographs, letters, journal entries, toys preserved across generations. One section featured Sarah Thompson's later life, her teaching career, her activism, her quiet dignity in the face of segregation. Her graduation photograph from Spelman College hung beside a Birmingham newspaper article about her retirement in 1945 after 38 years of teaching. Another section examined the legal and social barriers that made such rescues necessary and dangerous. Maps showed the spread of Jim Crow laws, timelines documented the erosion of black civil rights, charts illustrated the spike in racial violence during the 1890s and early 1900s. The exhibition also posed difficult questions. How many children weren't saved? How many families tried to intervene but failed? How many stories remain hidden still, their evidence lost or destroyed? Dr. Williams had contributed personal items to the exhibition, including Sarah's teacher's badge, her reading glasses, and a Bible inscribed, "To Sarah with Love, Mother Margaret, Christmas 1895. Michael Patterson stood with Dr. Williams at the opening reception, looking at the photograph of their shared ancestors. "It's strange," he said. "We've been family for over a century, but we didn't know each other until now." "Sarah knew," Dr. Williams replied. "She kept the connection alive through letters, through her relationships with Catherine and her children. She made sure the truth wasn't completely lost." Thomas had been invited to speak at the opening. He stood before the crowded gallery, his voice steady but emotional. "When I first saw that photograph, I noticed an inconsistency, a seventh person who shouldn't have existed according to official records. But Sarah wasn't an inconsistency. She was a child who deserved to live, to be loved, to have a family, and the Hendersons, at tremendous risk, gave her that." He paused, looking at the photograph. "This story reminds us that resistance takes many forms. Sometimes it's public and dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet and hidden. A family opening their door, a photographer preserving evidence, a mother teaching a traumatized child to read. These small acts of courage saved lives, Sarah's life, and probably many others we'll never know about." The exhibition traveled to Atlanta, Birmingham, and 6 other cities. It inspired additional research, sparked community conversations about historical racial violence, and connected more families separated by the color line but joined by stories of rescue and resistance. Schools began teaching Sarah's story. Children learned that history isn't just about presidents and wars. It's also about ordinary people making extraordinary moral choices. For Thomas, the discovery had transformed his career and his understanding of history. He'd learned to look beyond official records, to trust family legends, to examine photographs with new eyes. How many other stories were waiting, hidden in attics and archives? Sarah Thompson had lived 87 years, had taught hundreds of children, had fought for justice in her quiet, determined way. For most of that time, her childhood had been a secret, her rescue unacknowledged, her family connection denied. But now, more than a century after that Christmas dinner in 1895, Sarah sat at the table with her family. She was visible, she was counted, she was remembered. The 7th child was hidden no more. In the photograph, frozen in time, Sarah's expression remained solemn and watchful. But Thomas liked to imagine that somewhere, somehow, she knew her story had finally been told. That the love that had saved her, the family that had claimed her, the courage that had sheltered her, all of it had been recovered from the shadows and brought into the light. The Henderson family had photographed her because she was their daughter, no matter what the law said. And now, finally, the world knew it too.